Hello, you amazing people. You're listening to the Marketing and Coffee Podcast, the show that brings you the latest in marketing, especially in the UAE market, with your host, Lijo Etup.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. In this difficult times, e-commerce is the business and the way forward. No matter which business you are doing, if you're selling something online, that's the way forward. And how do you adapt for that growth is something that we will discuss through this podcast. And no other better person to bring to this podcast other than Omar Rustam, who is the e-commerce marketing head for HP for the region, to give a little more details about Omar. He's a seasoned professional e-commerce and digital marketing veteran. He has worked in organizations like Microsoft, Nokia, Starcom before joining HP, where today he is a part of the worldwide center of expertise for digital partner enablement for Middle East and Africa. So in his current role, he leads e-commerce marketing and business development. Very interesting, because you would love to hear how he is able to convert business from offline play, overseeing performance marketing, traffic optimization, and content management for both commercial and consumer business for print and PC categories. This would be of interest for all the business owners out there. Is he works with Middle East retailers to deliver marketing programs and solutions that enhance their omni-channel capabilities and technologies. Welcome, Omar. So let's start with how is e-commerce the hot topic during COVID times doing right now? What's your take on it right now?
Thank you very much for having me, Lijo. It's good to be here. And yes, I mean, there's definitely been a lot of change that we're seeing as the result of the current pandemic. What's been interesting to see is that there are some businesses that have suffered greatly under COVID-19. A lot of things related to travel and tourism particularly, but then there are some businesses that have boomed as a result. And here you have your collaboration tools and so on, but also you've got e-commerce which has boomed greatly. And I mean, if it's anything to go by, you look at Amazon's share price before and after, and you see that they're definitely on the rise. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. So one is people are definitely self-isolating, so they want less exposure to public areas where they could possibly get sick. So they're spending a lot more time at home, and for whatever that can be brought and ordered, that's what they're doing. And also, it's the fact of convenience as well. But definitely all of that has been accelerated due to the current pandemic.
Interesting. So the early studies that's come from China says that the essentials have done much better than the luxuries items have really struggled. Is your understanding the same here in this region, or has it behaved in a different way?
Well, I mean, it's been interesting, because what we've seen is we've seen growth across everything in general. Even the retailers and the pure players that we've spoken to have echoed. I mean, that's what they've seen. And a lot of it has to do with how people behave under quarantine. So while we've seen growth across, so we work closely with Google, and one syndicated and one research that they shared with us is that across our categories where we're in, so we're in printers, we're in PCs, we're in PC accessories, and we also do ink cartridges for our printers and monitors as well. So across all of our categories, we've seen growth in search and interest by Google, and to a very large degree, because people are at home a lot more, they're doing a lot more research. So it makes sense from that perspective. But then you also look at people under quarantine what are they trying to do? They want to be entertained. That's definitely a very big piece of it. And that's where, if we use a tool called SimilarWeb, which allows us to monitor traffic across multiple websites. And what we've been seeing has been quite interesting because, you see time spent on Netflix, it's going through the roof. You see time, spent on Twitch for gaming, it's also going through the roof. And to a large degree, we're seeing that reflected in the business. So people are looking for gaming machines so that they can game and pass the time. And definitely, purchases have gone up in the online space. And to a very large degree, it's proportionate to what's happening in the store. So there are some markets where you've had complete lockdown, where retailers have had to completely pivot their business from maybe 1% or 2% online to some weeks being 100% online, where all stores have been shut. And it's also dependent on how certain countries have responded. So countries that have said, for example, that we will only allow supermarkets and mass merchant type of environments to operate, but everyone else needs to close, then that's where you see a massive shift into online for electronics, for all of these other categories that don't fall into the non-essential type of environment. So there's definitely a relationship between what happens on the ground and then ultimately how that manifests itself in the online space, and the two are interrelated. But the one thing that we're sure of is that once and I know it's a little bit far to think of this, but once we're done with this pandemic and things are relatively back to normal, I don't believe that consumers will go back to the way it was before. They have been exposed into different modes of purchase, and I think that is going to stick with them. Particularly, you look at the older segment of the elderly, where they're not typically associated with e-commerce, but due to the fact that COVID-19, they are particularly at risk from it, they will tend to self-isolate and maybe gain more exposure into e-commerce through that necessity. So I do think that there will be some changes, and it will be a learning curve for everyone to see how things change.
Yeah, if you're the clients, I tell this a lot of clients. People, even if they're not buying, they're doing window shopping a lot. So this is even if your category is not selling and it's not one of the products that consumers are wanting, but they're doing window shopping. They're all looking and researching, and at the time when they actually want to buy, and if you're not in the consideration set because you were not well prepared online, it could lead to a loss of sales at that point of time. And we were just speaking before we started, it's like how groceries have kind of broken that barrier of online shopping, which was there earlier. I think you're speaking to a lot of those kind of retailers also on their experience.
Absolutely. I mean, so two things here. I mean, on your first point, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a lot of research that is taking place, and I think one of the mistakes that often happens is that there's a fixation with the bottom of the funnel, the conversion. But what a lot of times people forget is that to get to that bottom of the funnel, you sort of have to build the top as well, so that the funnel has something to funnel through at the end of the day. But for that, that's a really important part, and content and reviews and the entire experience is really critical there. And while to a certain degree, the current pandemic, because of the change in behavior of consumers migrating to online and for a lot of their purchases, that represents an opportunity. But that opportunity is lost if the experience isn't great. So if people are waiting, several weeks after they filled up their basket, and then the basket arrives and there's products missing in it, because the inventory isn't tied up within the architecture, then that's a bad experience, and people are less likely, to stick with that retailer once things open up. So the experience factor, the content, the research, all of that stuff is really critical. It's not just about the bottom of the funnel, like you said. The second thing is absolutely, grocery has been probably the biggest gainer as a segment. Based on our discussions with retailers and pure players, they've definitely mentioned that that's where they're seeing massive growth. I think, I mean, in the most markets, electronics usually tends to lead the way, especially mobiles, because that's kind of an easy purchase to make. If you go and you see it at the store and then you order it online, you pretty much know what you're getting. But the grocery, people have often, it's often a late comer to the game. But I think in this particular situation, it's really accelerated, and that's really built on the need and the fact that there are really good providers out there with a good experience, with good products, fresh produce, that haven't disappointed. So they've made that adoption easy, and the better the experience becomes, and the smoother and easier, for sure, that growth will be sustained. And again, to a large part, we were talking about changing consumer behavior, and that's something that if the experience is good, I think grocery will be one of the things that sticks with consumers, simply because it's something that's bought in frequency. There's a lot of items that it's just a no-brainer, and you know what you want from it. And then third is even items where you might be a bit choosy. If there's a level of trust established in terms of the produce being fresh and good quality, then it removes that, let's say, obstacle or fear of not getting the best thing. So yeah, I mean, as long as that experience is managed well, I see it as something that can sustain the growth and maintain a positive share.
Yeah, so very interesting. My personal experience, like yesterday in the printer and category, was that I had gone to pick up some cartridges because my cartridge got over, and I was standing there as a marketer. I thought, okay, I'm sure this has gone through the roof because everybody is printing at home, because everybody's studying at home. People who have not had printers at home are buying printers. People whose cartridges use them. Typically, I buy a cartridge which only 300 pages to be printed. But yesterday, I bought a cartridge that 800 pages needs to be printed because I knew the printing has gone up drastically. Everybody's printing at home. My wife is printing, I'm printing at home. So that's the consumption has gone up to a category that I didn't imagine would go. So how has it been for your industry otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, it's as you said. I mean, we're seeing a shift in behavior, because as people are, as children are studying at home, as parents are working at home, there's been ultimately a shift in behavior, and so as a result, the way that consumers have reacted is also manifesting that. So they are buying their cartridges online because they're studying from home, and to a certain degree, we are seeing people buying printers as well, because they need to prepare for the year. And I imagine, I mean, we will probably see some sort of seasonality around this, because that's how people are, right? They buy things when they need them. When we come to the back to school season, I imagine there'll be definitely a surge around that time. And definitely, as we close out this year, there will be replenishment as we around inks and so on. But I think everyone, to a large degree, which has been interesting, has been setting up their work-study space at home. And I think the one thing that everyone has in common with COVID-19 is it caught us all unaware. So whether you're a student at home, whether you're someone who needs to work from home, you don't necessarily have that infrastructure and environment set up, and then that's kind of where you go to the market to look for monitors, keyboards, mice, headsets, and so on. And of course, given the current situation, a lot of that has taken place online.
So besides the fact that a lot of people were in the right place at the right time, in the sense that they had an online channel, and the moment the thing shifted to offline to online, they were there at that place of time. But more also, I realized as I speak to a lot of people that they were not at the right place at the right time. They just kept postponing the inevitable that tomorrow, like I'll bring my online plate tomorrow. And they're all struggling now. So there is now fly-by-night operations that I've got my e-commerce site up and running. And a lot of the retailers were caught napping, especially. I'm sure they missed out on that whole strategy for somebody who wants to go online right now and is offline. I mean, what should he be looking at? What are the things that he should be doing?
Well, I mean, the good thing about online is it offers a lot of flexibility. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of ways to reach a customer, and it really depends on the type of business that you are. Having your own e-commerce website, and that might take. I mean, now there's a lot of good tools that are really much plug and play. You've got Shopify, you've got a lot of providers that have really evolved and made it simpler over time. So getting started now is not so much of an issue, but it's, I think, more about having the vision and the right setup and knowing what you want to get out of it, and what you're looking to drive as a relationship with the customer, because it's not something that you'll ever build and you'll say, okay, now I'm done. So my feeling or my advice would be first to really take a step back, identify what is that route to market that you want to take, and then begin looking at, okay, how do I then begin pulling together all those bits and pieces together, and that's where you really have to have a short-term, mid-term, and long-term plan, and to be realistic about it. So, in the short term, it could be, okay, let's just have sort of the storefront, being able to get product in hand. Maybe we don't go with a huge selection. For example, let's start off small and scale our way up. And then, the midterm could be about, okay, then how do we now look at how do we optimize operations and experience and so on. And then, third point is, okay, then how do we pursue aggressive growth and so on. So it really differs. But I would say, it's important to have that kind of strategy and to do the thinking behind to be able to build and execute on that strategy.
Yeah, so very clearly what you're saying, people need to be invested for a long period of time. This cannot happen a fly-by-night, overnight success. This is a mix of experience, having the right kind of a UX, leading to a good delivery experience, and then so I guess people have to vary that if they're coming online, they need to stay invested, because it's not an overnight success just because it is online, right?
100%. I mean, what I would say is, all the fundamentals that you're used to offline, they apply online. It's just, it's a different methodology, but it is the same fundamentals. And I mean, if there's one like specific thing that I would say is that the most important thing is you need to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the customer, of the person who's coming to your site. So think about, the browsing experience. I mean, how long is it taking for the page to load? Because people now, they have a very short attention span. You need to consider, is he coming from mobile or web? If now we're seeing that most traffic is coming from mobile. It's really looking at that experience side of things, and usually usually the framework that I have for myself, that I operate within, is I look at it in 4 quadrants. So I look at it first in terms of assortment. So once like the experience side of things is taken care of, I look at, okay, when this person comes to my site, is he or she able to find what they need in terms of product, or am I missing certain variants? Do I not have the right stuff in stock? So on. So that's the first thing, is that because people ultimately can't buy what you don't have. So it's first making sure that listing is correct. Then it's moving into the pricing. Is from that listing, is the pricing competitive? Can they get it cheaper elsewhere? Is it available on Amazon for less? So on and so forth. Who am I competing with? So making sure that your pricing is competitive is another key element. Then looking at the content experience around it, because once people have decided that, okay, I'm interested in this product, it's at an attractive price, they begin evaluating between it and the other products. So having, videos, images, things that tell a story about the product, of course, having the specs, benefits, all of that stuff becomes critical. Ratings and reviews, because ultimately people are looking for validation before they buy to make sure that this is a good product. So all of these elements become critical within that journey of decision making. And then finally, like when these three, let's say, quadrants have been addressed, then I finally look at the marketing engine, because the marketing is just what gives acceleration. But if the fundamentals, which is what we just discussed, isn't there, then that's a bad experience. So it's really having that full 360 within the strategy and thinking about what kind of an experience the customer is having.
Yeah, so this is awesome, and I'm sure that this is a very valid point for anybody. Like even if they have a e-commerce strategy, we look at it from a fresh point of view, and also people who are offline to online to make sure that these 4 quadrants are met in getting this. So that's a very good summary of how people should look at the entire scaling up of the e-commerce operations. And also a lot of the challenges that a lot of business fail is like what this is, that everything is measurable. So I guess to have the right measures in place, right tools in place, also would help the customer to make a more evolved decision making.
100%. What I would say is, most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes, because this field, is far from complete. We're all learning something new every day. But the only way you're going to get there is if you make those mistakes. So that's probably the best piece of advice. But always be learning, and a big part of learning is that you have to be tracking, because you can't really learn from something that isn't tracked. So make sure that you have the right tracking setup, that you're measuring every type of optimization, every type of adaptation that you're doing. But don't be afraid to make a mistake. That's actually a learning opportunity. I wouldn't call it a mistake.
Yeah, great. So excellent. So I guess we are in a new phase of life where something very exciting for an e-commerce marketer and a general marketer for sure. And it's very exciting times for anybody. But yes, a lot of the businesses have to redefine themselves. And I think, Omar, you've got amazing pointers to how people should look at when they go e-commerce. And I think it's going to help a lot of them and make them plan better way. Yeah, that's amazing insight and very well said. You have to make mistakes. You will make mistakes, and the only way to know that you're making mistakes and keep reinventing yourself is make sure it's trackable. So we discussed a lot of things. We discussed on an overall level how the e-commerce business is affected or is doing well, which are the industries that is doing well, how very specific to your business HP is doing well, and the consumer behavioral changes, how the 4 quadrants helps people to streamline the way they're going to measure or look at scaling up. And we know that the measurement is an important part of the business. So it's very exciting times for you as a e-commerce marketer. And I'm sure there are lots of e-commerce marketer, e-commerce business owners who are looking for some plans on how to scale up. So how would you like to summarize? What are the things that they should say that these are the things that I should go ahead and do?
Sure. I mean, we've talked, quite a bit about some points, but I think there are some in my mind that stand out as key, on starting on e-commerce and really guiding how the approach happens. So the first I'd probably start with is really revisiting the objectives of why going online, because if you're moving into the online space, or even if you're established there, the guiding principle or the North Star principle should always be the objectives that you're trying to drive.
Right.
So it's really about revisiting the objectives of why online, because then that really guides your strategy that you're going to build eventually. So it's a very important thing to figure out at the beginning, and you might not even get it right in the beginning. You might need to pivot at some point, and that's fine. But you should always be guided, by a principle. There should always be a North Star that you're aiming towards. So once you've understood what that objective is, then you begin to plot the best way to get there, the best route to market. Because online, there's a lot of different ways of reaching to consumers. So you can build your own website and e-commerce platform and be a direct-to-consumer type of brand, or you could go into the online retail model where you're selling to online retailers who are then selling your product to their customers, or there's even becoming a marketplace seller. So they offer a lot of different routes to market, and they have different advantages depending on what you're really trying to achieve as a brand. So I mean, when we talk about direct to consumer, it's more of an experiential approach. Marketplace, it kind of gives you the spread to be on different platforms and sell in a lot of different places and try to maximize revenue. So again, I mean, going back to the objective and then identifying the best way to get there, I'd say those are two key principles. Then moving into the third is around having those short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals, because as you evolve in the online space, those will invariably change. But again, I mean, planning is really key to keep you centered and guided in terms of growing your business. So it's key to really think about, okay, in the short term, what am I trying to achieve? Am I trying to lay the foundation? Am I trying to learn about the business? What exactly am I trying to do in the short term? Then in the midterm, is it that I'm looking to scale? Do I need to hit a certain revenue number? What am I gunning for in the midterm, so I feel a bit more comfortable? And then really the long-term plan of what will look like success ultimately. What's sort of the big thing that I want to achieve maybe a year or two down the line. So having that kind of planning and process kind of keeps you centered as you evolve and as you grow in the space. Fourth, and I'd say this is a really, really important one, is don't be afraid of making mistakes, because this is an ever-evolving space, and mistakes is always an opportunity to learn. And when it comes to online specifically, we're all students here. We're all learning. This is by far very far from a finished ecosystem. So learning is very important to adapt, and mistakes really provide that foundation of optimizing and carrying that learning forward for the future. Number five, and for me, this is probably the most important one, is always putting yourself in the customer's shoes. Because ultimately, I mean, when I look at all the big companies, the successful companies, this is the principle that they wholeheartedly embraced. I mean, you look at a company like Amazon and how they developed a product like Prime. That shows you that they understood their customers really well, and they put them at the heart and center of everything that they did. So really thinking about how it can be a better experience, how it can be a more personal experience. All of that stuff's really really important. But ultimately, we are selling to people regardless of what we are selling, and it always will start and end with the customer. So having that kind of empathy, being able to put yourself in their shoes, that's probably one of the most valuable things that you can do. And I'll probably stop at those five, but those are the ones that I feel are quite important.
Yeah, exactly. So if the customer is not at the center of the, then you have to be where the customer is and not bringing where you want them to be. So if you're not selling what the customer wants, it's a matter of time before things starts collapsing around you, and you'll see why the customer is not buying or something. So yeah, it's interesting. So thanks a lot, Omar. You want to add something more? Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, absolutely, you're absolutely right. And it could be, and the thing is that we've seen very small things make that big difference. So you could have a fantastic site experience. You could be driving people, and then the smallest thing of like having a delivery fee, then your entire funnel could look fantastic. Then they add the cart, and then they see the delivery fee and they bounce. And it's something that small. But then, I mean, that takes us back to the whole reporting point of basically tracking through the funnel, and then that's how you sort of identify, and also, like you were saying, the customer experience, right? But yeah, 100%. So I just wanted to throw that last example in there.
Yeah, excellent. Sounds good. Excellent. Thanks a lot, Omar, for coming on. So I'm sure a lot of people will find a huge value on, because especially now e-commerce is the hottest word going around, irrespective of the kind of business that you're doing, be it B2B, B2C. So thanks a lot for coming on board, and look forward to continue the conversation offline too.
Thanks a lot, Lijo. I really appreciated and enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope that your listeners find this interesting. And as always, I look forward to our regular chats on these topics. And yes, I mean, let's definitely watch the space. It'll continue to be interesting for some time in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Okay.